September 18, 1943, Apennine Mountains, northern Italy. Dawn crept slowly over the ridgeline, turning the fog the color of ash. Pine needles crunched faintly under boots somewhere below, then stopped. A German reconnaissance patrol froze in place, breath held, fingers tightening on rifle stocks. Nothing moved. Nothing sounded wrong. And yet every man in the patrol felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Lieutenant Carl Weiss, intelligence officer attached to the 26th Panzer Division, raised a clenched fist. The column halted. He scanned the tree line through binoculars, searching for the smallest mistake, a broken branch, a glint of metal, a shadow that didn't belong. There was nothing. Still, Weiss swallowed hard, because this was the third patrol in a week that had gone blind in this sector. Routes compromised, ambushes perfectly avoided by Allied units, enemy movements anticipated hours before they happened. And every time, the same note appeared in the reports sent back up the chain. Enemy reconnaissance presence suspected. Operative unknown. Not a unit, not a name, not even a confirmed nationality. Just an absence that caused plans to fail. Weiss lowered his binoculars. "Pull back," he ordered quietly. The patrol withdrew the way they had come, unaware that their decision had already been accounted for, hours earlier. High above them, concealed among rocks that matched the mountain's skin, a lone figure watched without moving. No scope, no binoculars, just naked eyes, memory, and an understanding of the land that didn't require confirmation. He had been there before the Germans arrived. He would be gone long before they realized it. Berlin, October 1943. Deep inside the Reich main security office, analysts compared field reports from Italy, southern France, and the Balkans. Different terrain, different Allied units, same recurring problem. Reconnaissance failures, predictable patrol losses, enemy units avoiding contact with unnatural precision. One analyst circled a phrase that appeared too often to ignore. Enemy appears to sense movement before visual contact. Another added a note in the margin, possibly single scout influencing multiple operations. That idea unsettled them more than an entire unit ever could. Back in Italy, Allied after-action reports were frustratingly vague. Enemy patrol diverted, route cleared ahead of schedule, contact avoided as planned. No heroics, no names. The scout in question was listed simply as attached personnel. The man himself did not think of what he did as reconnaissance. To him, it was listening. He listened to stone before stepping on it, to birds before they took flight, to silence where there should have been noise. He had learned long before the war that land spoke, but only if you didn't interrupt it. The uniform was new. The war was not. Italy, late October 1943. A British major watched Allied troops move through a pass that German maps marked as high risk. They encountered no resistance, no mines, no ambush. When the major asked how the route had been cleared, the answer was always the same. Our scout walked it. What scout? A pause. Just the scout. German counterintelligence tried everything. They changed patrol timings. They fed false movement orders. They set traps designed to catch observers instead of fighters. Nothing worked. Whatever, whoever was shadowing them didn't react to orders. They reacted to intent. And intent was harder to hide than words. One report, stamped confidential and circulated only briefly, described the phenomenon with growing unease. Enemy reconnaissance does not behave like standard military observation. No evidence of equipment, no traceable withdrawal. Presence inferred only through outcome. A senior officer scrawled a single word beneath it: unacceptable. In the field, German soldiers gave it another name. They whispered it at night, half joking, half afraid. Der Geist aus den Bergen, the ghost of the mountains. They never knew he was Apache, never knew where he came from, never knew what he was called. And that was precisely why he was effective. Because the most feared scout of the war never became a target. He never became a name. He became a problem, one the enemy could not solve.
November 6th, 1943, Ligurian coast, Italy. Rain slicked the mule tracks until they shone like oil. German engineers worked by lantern light, stringing wire and setting trip flares along a narrow ravine that fed into the coastal hills. The plan was simple: bait the watcher. If there was a single scout guiding Allied movements, the Germans would give him something irresistible, an obvious weakness, a route that begged to be observed. Lieutenant Karl Weiss watched from a rock shelf above the ravine, collar turned up against the cold. He had ordered the patrols to move loudly tonight. Boots scraped, men coughed, a deliberate clumsiness meant to advertise presence. The trap was not the wire or the flares. The trap was the expectation that someone would come to look. Hours passed. Nothing happened. At 0214, a flare burst, white light flooding the ravine. A corporal swore. Weiss felt a flicker of relief. Got him. But the flare had been triggered from the wrong direction, not uphill where an observer would be, not even from the ravine floor. The wire had been brushed from behind the German line, near a stand of chestnut trees that no patrol had entered for days. Weiss stared into the darkness. The flare died. The night swallowed the mistake. Whatever had touched the wire had already gone. By dawn, Allied artillery struck a supply column the Germans had rerouted after midnight, information that should not have existed anywhere outside Weiss's own notebook. The conclusion was unavoidable. The scout was not watching routes. He was watching people. German counterintelligence shifted tactics. They began tracking effects instead of causes. If the enemy avoided a patrol, they marked the time. If a convoy was hit, they mapped who knew about it and when. The web grew dense with red pins and penciled arrows. A pattern emerged that made no sense to men trained to think in radios and reports. The scout never followed the same path twice. He never lingered. He never corrected himself. And he never took the bait. Apennines, mid-November. A British captain named James Harrow received a folded scrap of paper from an intelligence runner. No letterhead, no signature. Delay movement 12 minutes, it read. Wind wrong. Harrow checked his watch. 12 minutes later, a German patrol crossed the trail they would have used, close enough that Harrow could hear the leather creak on rifle slings. Afterward, he asked who sent the note. The runner shrugged. He left it where I'd see it. Where's he now? The runner looked back at the hills. Not there. German officers complained that the enemy seemed to feel their intentions. A report from Army Group C described Allied units anticipating movement without discernible reconnaissance. Another noted that enemy reaction precedes execution. Weiss wrote in his private diary, a thing he never intended to share. If there is one man, he does not observe us, he understands us. The scout's methods baffled Allied officers as much as they unnerved Germans. He used no radio. He rarely spoke. When asked how he knew where to be, he answered with questions instead. Why would you go that way? Why would they wait there? Why are the birds quiet? He trained a handful of runners, not in techniques, but in attention. He taught them what not to disturb, when to stop, when to let a plan die because the land had changed its mind. His reports were short, often one line, sometimes a single word. Wrong, late, empty. They were always correct. In Berlin, analysts tried to put a face to the problem. They debated whether it was British, American, or partisan. They argued about equipment that left no trace. A few suggested superstition. Those men were reassigned. One memo circulated briefly before disappearing into a locked file stated, "Enemy operative displays non-standard reconnaissance behavior consistent with indigenous fieldcraft. Identity unknown." That word, indigenous, was underlined once, then crossed out. December 1943, snowline. Winter changed the game. Snow revealed what Earth concealed. Tracks betrayed even the careful. German patrols grew confident again. For a week, Allied movements slowed. Plans were postponed. The scout went quiet. Then, one night, Weiss's patrol found prints that did not belong. They followed them eagerly, too eagerly, down a slope that narrowed into a white corridor. At the bend, machine gun fire erupted from above, perfectly sighted. The ambush was devastating. When the firing stopped, the footprints ended at a rock face where the wind had scoured the snow clean. Weiss survived. Many did not. Later, examining the site, he realized the footprints had been placed, pressed in with boots carried by hand. The real path ran along the windward ridge, invisible to anyone who did not know how snow erased its own stories. Weiss felt a chill that had nothing to do with winter. The scout was adapting, teaching the land to lie. German counterintelligence escalated. They ordered night sweeps. They posted observers to watch the watches. They tried to catch a shadow with shadows. The scout responded by becoming rarer. He appeared only where it mattered. He influenced outcomes without presence. Plans failed miles away from where he had last been seen. He was no longer a man to be found. He was a condition. And as the winter deepened, German officers began to realize something worse than failure. Even if they found him, they might not recognize him at all.
January 22nd, 1944, Anzio beachhead, Italy. The sea was iron gray, chopped by wind and artillery shockwaves. Landing craft slammed against the sand, men spilling out into smoke and chaos. German observers watched from the high ground, timing the landings, plotting kill zones with the calm efficiency of professionals. Then something went wrong. A battery that should have been firing stayed silent. A counterattack that should have hit the beach stalled on a road that suddenly didn't exist. An armored unit moved, then stopped, as if warned. Hours later, as the beachhead stabilized against all expectation, a German signals officer reported a baffling detail. Orders issued at 4:30 had been countered by Allied movement at 4:18. The enemy had reacted before the order was given. Rome, Abwehr Liaison Office. Files stacked on a long table, each marked with a different sector. Apennines, Liguria, Anzio, Balkans. The same handwriting appeared in the margins, short notes, underlined twice. Recon failure, enemy anticipation, no contact. An Abwehr officer named Otto Brandner rubbed his temples. He had chased networks before, partisans, radio cells, courier lines. They always left something behind, a pattern of communication, a dependency. This left nothing. Brandner proposed a theory that drew quiet laughter in the room. Assume a single operative, assume no radio, assume no written orders. Someone scoffed. Then assume magic? Brandner didn't smile. Assume experience. The scout was attached to no single unit for long. He arrived, observed, influenced, and left. He moved through Allied lines without announcement, slept where the ground allowed, and carried less than most men thought possible. A rifle, rarely used. A knife, rarely drawn. Water carried only where it couldn't be found. What he carried instead was memory. He remembered how the land reacted to weight, how fog settled in saddles before valleys, how men betrayed intent with posture long before movement. He didn't draw maps, he became one. Anzio, 2 nights later. A British lieutenant waited in a half-collapsed farmhouse, staring at a candle stub. He had been told to expect a message. He didn't know from whom. The message arrived as a sound. 3 small stones tapped together outside the wall, then silence. The lieutenant stepped out. No one there. On the ground, pressed into dust with a fingertip, a line angled slightly east. Nothing else. He waited. He delayed his patrol. An hour later, German mortars bracketed the route he would have taken. When the lieutenant filed his report, he credited terrain indicators. It was safer that way. German counterintelligence grew desperate. They tried to name the problem, believing that a name would make it finite. They called him Der Waldläufer, the forest runner, Der Schattenmann, the shadow man, Der Apache, scribbled once, then struck through.
That last word troubled Brandner. It suggested a lineage, not a unit, a way of moving learned long before Europe learned to write manuals. Brandner requested permission to embed observers inside German patrols, men trained to notice absence. The request was denied. Too expensive, too uncertain. War did not have patience for uncertainty. Spring 1944, southern France. A rail sabotage failed, not because it was discovered, but because the explosives had been removed hours earlier. German guards found the charges neatly stacked beside the track, untouched, no fingerprints, no wires cut incorrectly. A note lay on top, written in pencil in careful block letters. Too many eyes. Brandner stared at the photograph of the note. It wasn't a threat, it was advice. Allied officers argued about whether the scout was one man or many. Some thought the effect too widespread to be singular. Others insisted the style was unmistakable, economical, restrained, consistent. The scout himself did nothing to clarify it. He trained others briefly, then released them. He corrected mistakes once, never twice. He let methods propagate without ownership, knowing that credit attracted attention. If captured, he would become a file. If named, he would become a target. So he remained neither. July 1944, after the breakout. As German lines collapsed and Allied forces surged forward, the scouts' influence waned, not because it failed, but because it was no longer needed in the same way. Movement became loud, speed replaced subtlety. The war changed its face. German files attempted a final summary. Enemy reconnaissance interference ceases with large-scale maneuver warfare. Operative likely reassigned or withdrawn. Identity unresolved. Brandner closed the folder. It was the only one in his career that felt unfinished. After the war, Allied archives told a clean story. Divisions advanced, battles were won. Intelligence was credited to air photos, signals intercepts, and brave resistance networks. There was no place for a man who left no paper. Years later, an American officer teaching reconnaissance would tell his students, "If you're doing it right, no one will ever know you were there." He did not say where that lesson came from. The scout returned home without ceremony. No parade, no citation. He stepped off a train into heat and dust that felt familiar, and for the first time in years, he listened to a land that didn't echo with artillery. The enemy had never managed to identify him. History would do no better.
Autumn 1946, American Southwest. The train exhaled steam and rolled to a stop, beneath a sky so wide it felt unfamiliar after Europe's narrow valleys. There was no band, no officer waiting with papers, just heat, dust, and the smell of creosote. The man stepped down with a small canvas bag slung over his shoulder and paused long enough to feel the ground through the soles of his boots. It was good ground, honest, loud with insects, quiet where it mattered. He didn't look back at the train. In Europe, the files were sealed. German intelligence closed the last folder with a final, unsatisfying line. Operative identity unresolved. Influence confirmed. Method unknown. The Allies filed their own reports, thick binders of success attributed to coordination, momentum, and planning. There was no slot for a scout who left no trace. No citations for a man whose greatest skill was ensuring others never needed to fire. History prefers objects it can count. The scout had never been one of them. In the years that followed, the techniques he embodied did not disappear. They spread, quietly, cleaned of context, rewritten as principles. At training grounds, instructors spoke of reading negative space, listening before movement, letting terrain decide pace. They demonstrated how to cross ground without announcing intention, how to stop when the land said stop, how to move so that even success looked like accident. No one said where those lessons came from. They said, "This is how you survive." Some of the men who had worked with him tried once to give him credit. A British major mentioned "our Apache scout" in a lecture. The phrase was removed in editing. Another officer suggested a footnote in a training circular. It never appeared in print. Not out of malice,
out of habit. Institutions flatten stories. They sand down edges until only function remains. The scout's function remained flawless. Occasionally, his name almost surfaced. A veteran reunion, a half-remembered nickname, a photograph where a face in the background could not be identified. Each time the trail dissolved under scrutiny. No service number to cross-reference, no permanent unit assignment to anchor him. He served precisely as he moved, between categories. He did not tell stories when he got home. When asked about the war, he said only that Europe had different kinds of silence, that mountains there watched you back, that men gave themselves away long before they moved. He taught younger relatives how to walk without arguing with the land, how to wait without growing impatient, how to know when not to go somewhere. He never called it reconnaissance. He called it listening. Decades later, a declassified German document surfaced in an archive, a thin folder overlooked for years. Inside was a map with pencil marks and a single handwritten note on the margin, translated into English long after the men who wrote it were gone. We plan as if unseen. The enemy acts as if already present. There was no name attached, only frustration. Modern soldiers still learn what he knew. They learn that the loudest man dies first, that the straight line is a lie, that ground remembers mistakes longer than enemies do. They learn to survive by subtraction, by removing sound, urgency, ego. They learn without knowing it from a man the enemy never managed to identify. History will never give him a chapter heading. There will be no confirmed kill counts, no photograph labeled with certainty, no monument carved with a name. But his influence persists in every patrol that avoids contact because it felt wrong, in every route changed without explanation, in every soldier who lives because someone sensed danger before it arrived. The Germans called him a ghost because they could not see him. The truth was simpler. He was never trying to be seen.